the mission is so important. So I felt like this is my community. That's why I became a member. And later on in 2012, this is really what motivated me to become the coordinator. I wanted to, like many of us here, like all of us here, I guess, I wanted to make a difference, and I wanted to contribute to this, to building this community.
Sure, thank you. I'll go to Chris next, and then I'll come back to you, Alan. Chris, why did you join the SIG? Why did you become the coordinator of the SIG?
I mean, yeah, very similar reasons to Margit, really. I think it's about wanting to make a contribution to the field of global issues and share my experience and my knowledge within that field with others, but also to have that knowledge shared in return by the people you're working with. And I think that's what's so great about GISIG, as we've seen today with all the 46 countries that people are coming from. You're getting so much different inputs and information from people from all of those different countries. And I think it also ties into a sort of the philosophy I have about language teaching, about the importance of it, and what I see is the liberational potential of the English language, which I think is often not at the forefront of the minds of people working in the field, and looking at how an individual can advocate for those sorts of issues within the places that they work. But also, I think for me as well, the important thing when I was joint coordinator, what I was trying to do as well is to advocate for GISIG within IATEFL itself. And I think GISIG has a huge role outside of IATEFL in advocating with the wider world, but also within the organisation as well, and bringing global issues to meetings, making other SIGs aware of the kind of work that we're doing. So I think there is that internal sort of advocacy work that GISIG does, which is also very, very valuable.
Absolutely, yeah. We're going to go back in time then, Alan. To you, I wanted to ask you why you set up the SIG in the first place. What issues or circumstances prompted you to start GISIG?
Well, I mean, I think when I was doing this, it was around about 1990, actually. And there was a kind of rising tide of awareness of global concerns everywhere. Starting with Rachel Carson's Silent Spring back in 1962. And it had gone through, James Lovelock, Gaia in 1979, and Al Gore in 1992, and so on and so forth. So that was, it was very much in the air, particularly environmental issues. I was also struck by the fact that there seemed to be such a big gap between life and learning in English language teaching. It seemed to be divorced from the authentic realities, in fact. And of course, my own personal belief was that language learning has to be part of a broader education. It's not just about learning a language. So I felt that, a SIG which promoted these kinds of ideas was really necessary. And I managed to find a couple of things, actually. Oh, you can't see it. Oh no, it's back to front. I don't know. Can you see this?
No, we can see that.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So there were things like this, but these were around about 1992, I think. And I can't remember where this was published, actually. Might have been the IATEFL newsletter. And it took from about 1992 until the foundation, in 1995. So it wasn't a very easy process, partly because I don't think the ground was very fertile in IATEFL itself. And that's why what Chris just said is so important, that I think there's an internal advocacy argument to be made. Because in a way, I mean, we are a SIG, but the whole of IATEFL should be global issues, Shouldn't be necessary to have a separate SIG, really. But so those were the things that got me started anyway. And also a belief that we could make a difference, however small it was. And I quoted from Margaret Mead at the time, never doubt that a small group, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. So we
very
also
relevant today as ever.
Absolutely, and I mean we did have an immediate stimulus because a GISIG or GISIG had just been founded in JALS around about 1991, I think, by Kip Cates, and that was a very good example for us.
I'm interested to know which global issues were the most important at the time that you were very heavily involved with the SIG, and whether these are still the issues that are important now. Margit, how about you start?
Well, I would say that from the perspective of education, which is where I am, where we all are actually, the most important global issue was passivity and this feeling, you know, that I can't make a difference. I remember we organized an event on learning learned helplessness. That was the title of the event, because there are so many people who want to make a difference, but they feel like, oh, it's just too big, it's just too much. I don't even know how to start. They feel overwhelmed. So I think the biggest global issue I felt, and I still feel this is the biggest global issue, is to kind of feel empowered, to feel that we can make a difference. That yes, we have all got a footprint, but we've also got a handprint, sort of like the good things that we can do, the difference that we can all make, and that our sphere of influence is actually always a little bit bigger than we think. And sure, there are many constraints, and that the issues are hugely challenging, but you know, like Alan said, it's committed. A small group of committed people can make a huge difference, and individuals can make a huge difference. So I would say that this link to education, you know, getting rid of this passive attitude, which I think education unfortunately tends to breed, this kind of passive attitude. I think that to me that is the biggest issue that I would say as the issue then, and I think it still is.
Alan, would you add anything to that? What have things changed since you set up the SIG in terms of the issues that are important?
Yeah, at the time, I mean, the most important things I think were, you know, environmental issues and human rights issues. But obviously, you know, everything was on the table. But I do agree with what Margit's just been saying. It is very difficult to get people to engage. There are all sorts of things. I mean, you know, there's busyness. You know, I've got too much on my plate. I can't think about that. There's also, you know, ostrich thinking. I know it's awful, all these things that are happening, but, you know, I'd rather not think about it today. I'll think about that tomorrow. And the idea that, you know, everything is, there's so much momentum going in one direction, you know, there's nothing we can do about that. You know, you can't turn it round. Why bother? You know, there are a whole complex of human attitudes, and I think it's the attitudes which are the things we have to try and change.
Absolutely, yeah. I mentioned earlier that during your time as Joint Coordinator, Chris, you edited and published a compilation of previous GISIG newsletter submissions, Global Issues in an Uncertain World, which you can find on our website for free. In editing that particular publication, what did you learn about the global issues that were important at the time, and what would other people learn from reading that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just following on from what Margit and Alan said, I think there's a lot through reading through those sort of 25 years of things. You see how similar a lot of the things historically are to today. Certainly, there's loads on the environment and climate change, situation in Palestine, and also things like I think broadening out from what we're talking about at the micro level with what happens in the classroom, but also looking at some of the systemic or institutional challenges of implementing global issues within institutions themselves. The pressure of exams and the dominant neoliberal paradigm of education, all these sorts of things are sort of cut through a lot of the articles over those 25 years. So I think there's a lot there that's very similar to what we're facing nowadays. I think also, but you saw there's the start of some of those things which are even more relevant now. So I've got a quotation here from Jerry Abbott writing 2005, talking about critical reading, saying intelligent reading does not stop at the mere extraction of meanings. The meanings have to be considered and judged by the reader and then either accepted or rejected or put on hold. I think teaching should be subversive in that it fosters such inquiry, and it talks about the acute danger of unthinking literalism in the process of reading, whether of sacred or secular texts. And now, 15 years on, in an era of fake news and deep fakes on websites and all these sorts of things, you know, those issues have always been relevant and around, but I think they're even more acute now than they were historically. But also in rereading some of these materials, seeing some of the positive changes I think that have happened as well, and perhaps some of the, you know, if we look at some of the broader influences that GISIG has been trying to advocate for. So, for example, Paul Woods back in 1996, one of the earliest editions, saying that most English language textbooks for younger learners published in Britain are on the whole to be value-free, dealing with bland, uncontroversial topics and by and large avoiding global issues. Now, I don't think textbooks and course books nowadays are perfect, but I think they're a lot better than they certainly were back in the past. The sorts of issues that they're talking about now are much wider and richer, I think, than they were historically. So I think there has been some positive changes in those sorts of things. So there's obviously still, you know, a lot to be done, but I think there has also been a lot of changes there as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm interested in focusing, kind of forward focusing, looking at the future, and moving on from what we've just been talking about to the coming months and years. So what global issues do the three of you think will define English language teaching in the coming months and years? Margit, let's start with you again.
Well, I think one big issue is definitely that of technology, and, you know, making technology work for us rather than kind of like the tail wagging the dog sort of thing, because there are so many teachers for whom it's just an extra burden, or they feel really stressed out that they have to keep up with the bandwagon, and of course now because of the COVID situation, everybody a little bit was pushed to use technology. So maybe there was some things, I mean, it was good that we had to kind of like try and experiment, but I think in the long run it's important that, you know, technology works for us. So we have to have a vision of what we want. We have to have a joint vision of, I think we really need a paradigm shift in education, and then we need to kind of establish which direction we want to be moving into, and then how technology can help us to do that, rather than kind of feeling like we need to catch up. We're just running around like a headless chicken, and it just adds, and just feeling stressed out all the time. But definitely technology, how we can bring technology into our teaching even in normal times, because technology has fantastic potential and it can add accessibility and all kinds of things to ELT that I think are really, really important. But especially preparing for situations like we just had, so that we are really in control, we are in the driving seat. So that's definitely one. And the other thing also that Chris mentioned, that ELT, as we keep saying, is the language of international communication. It is the lingua franca. And I think it's also really important that all the people and the bodies and the resources that we use reflect the values of diversity and all the positive values that we want to promote. So there is no such thing as value-free teaching or value-free education. So it would be really good if all the people involved in ELT also shared these positive values. I think that's also,
that's a kind of more practical aspect that we can look at in a moment. I'm going to ask you about that in a moment. Great.
Okay.
Alan, how about for you? What do you think will be the global issues that define ELT in the coming months or years?
Well, can you see me?
Yes.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, we can see you.
Oh, okay. All right. I think I agree with Margit that technology is going to be a really important, still is already, what I call the colonization of attention, one thing. we live in an age of distraction, total distraction now. So it's very difficult for people to think clearly anymore, partly because of this, tsunami of stuff that's coming at them from all directions. There's also, of course, human rights in a digital age. What happens to our, democracy when technology can, in some ways, subvert it. So those are some of those things that I would want to talk about. There's a very good book, by the way, called this one called Stand Out of Our Light, which is all about this precise issue of getting, our attention being diverted. The second one, I think, is all the things to do with inequality of racial inequality, which is very much in the limelight now, but economic, educational, generational inequalities, which go right across the board. And I think this is going to be very important for us to focus on. And the third thing I would say is what I'm describing as the war on more. We've been living in a culture of more for a very long time. And, there are plenty of books about this too. I won't go into them, but I feel that this is now a wonderful opportunity that we have, because everybody was saying, no, you just can't stop the world. You can't stop doing things the way we've always done them. And now we've stopped. Are we going to start again? That's a major question. Are we just going to go back? Homo sapiens is its own worst enemy.
That's a great expression.
Can we defeat our own destructive propensities?
Thank you. Chris, I'm going to come to you, last but not least.
Yeah, again, just following on from Alan's point about inequality, I think, in the new world shake-up, however things go, I think the precariousness of the profession itself, I think, is an issue to really think about, and the working conditions of a lot of teachers, and those sort of related issues as well, things like native speakerism and those sorts of issues. So I think there are some real fundamental issues connected to the English language business model that I think that we just don't know how they're going to play out. Things like even for IELTS, for example, is the British Council going to be able to continue to deliver that worldwide as it has been doing, and all the things that happen as a result of IELTS, or how CELTAs and DELTAs are provided in the new world order, all these sorts of things. So I think, as well as these more classroom issues, or how things are more generally, I think that the English language business model and the system itself is going to come under a lot of stress. And I think some of that can be for good, that we may come out with a better model, but also, as Alan was saying, we may just resort to typing and go back to doing things as we've always done. But I think there is an opportunity to change things more positively in the model. Whether those things happen or not is, as I say, is up for grabs, I think.
I'd like to talk about practicalities now. What should globally minded educators be doing at an individual or a collective level to better prepare their students for the future? I'm going to have to ask you to be quite brief on this one, because we're running a little bit behind time. So I'll start with you, Chris.
I would just say, I think there is a risk that we enter now a period of deglobalization, both sort of physically, but also perhaps mentally as well. And I think it's important that globally minded educators need to keep pushing that. They are advocating for those issues still. A global world, a globally integrated world, is still a better world than a deglobalized world. And as we see in many places, in Trump's America, or in Ladakh and Sikkim, with China and India facing up, all these sorts of things, educators still have a very, very crucial role nowadays to play there, and to be that spokesperson to their students, and to work with their students to think through these issues. So I think educators have a more important role even than they did before to push that forward.
Sure. Margit, you touched on some practical aspects earlier. Would you like to add to that?
I think I'll go back to the handprint idea, just to kind of to enable students to see that they can make positive change, and for teachers, of course, to make a positive change, because teachers are really powerful. We have a great deal of power as educators. And so one activity that I sometimes do with my students who are actually future teachers is just to get them to draw around their hand on a piece of paper, and then establish like some goals that they have and put that into the palm of their hands, and then into their fingers, 5 things that are going to enable them to reach those goals. So the goal might be to foster critical thinking, or to strengthen global citizenship education. And then I think the GISIG website is an excellent place to start for resources. If somebody doesn't have the resources or the activities to where to start, I mean, there are just amazing resources there, and so many inspirational things as well. The creating change, I think that was mentioned in the chat box as well. That's just so inspirational. Bringing global issues in ELT in Africa, just all the things that teachers are doing there are just amazingly inspiring. And then there is the, 12 months of global issues, Margarita Koshier's free publication, which is also there on the website. So
you're doing some fantastic pro bono work. Thank you.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, I'm saying that because it's excellent, but
yeah,
of course I'm also happy to promote it. So there's so many good things. So I think the first thing is just to look around and identify some ways, some projects, some ways of bringing global issues into our teaching, and then to choose 4 or 5 concrete things that we're going to do as educators in the coming year. I think make it very practical, because again, it's easy to be overwhelmed. But
making the global local.
Yes, yeah. So I think that would be my idea.
Thank you, Alan. What should we be doing, individually or collectively, to better prepare students for the future?
Well, I don't know what you should be doing, really. Who am I to say what you should be doing? But I think teachers have to be role models for a start. There's no good saying one thing and doing another. Students are very quick to pick up on that. It's not enough simply to raise awareness. A lot of the activities that we do are what we call awareness raising activities. That's fine, it's a first step, but you have to move on from that, I think, to more engaged activities where you engage with entities outside the classroom, whether they are charities, local charities, or whether they're local authorities or whatever, where you can base projects on working with them. And in that way, the students find out a great deal more than they ever thought they could. Of course, there is this. Can you see this? Because I can't see anything on the screen.
Yes.
This is free, downloadable. It's been around for a couple of years now, full of activities, wonderful activities for developing global issues activities. So that it's not that there's a shortage of staff. It's a question of how you integrate it, particularly, as Chris was saying, into a system which is geared up for exams and all the other things that we know about, box ticking, and where education tends to get pushed to the sidelines.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to move on now and invite our attendees to put their own questions to our panel via the chat box. So if you can keep your mics on mute and your cameras turned off just for the moment, that'd be great. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can in the time available. While everybody is writing their questions in the chat, I'd like to share a little information about 2 fantastic upcoming GISIG publications. The first of these is Futurity, which is our new e-zine. The first edition is going to be available to our members very, very soon. It includes feature articles written by both GISIG members and non-members on a whole range of issues, from how to address ELT's environmental footprint to teachers' experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic, covering controversial issues in our classrooms, the recent Black Lives Matter protests and dealing with racism in the industry. And we have an in-depth interview with our current IATEFL Vice President, Gabriel Diaz-Maggioli, and teachers debating issues like work-life balance and online teacher education, all that and much, much more. So if you're interested in contributing to a future issue, we would absolutely love to hear from you. Please check out our website for more information about the contribution guidelines, and do get in touch. Contributors, of course, get a free copy of the e-zine, whether or not they're members themselves. Our second upcoming publication is another really exciting venture. In February, it's been mentioned already, we launched a wonderful compilation of articles by 22 teacher authors from 17 different African nations, entitled Creating Change, Global Issues in ELT in Africa. Following the success of this publication, the unstoppable Linda Ruas from the GISIG publications team has decided to put together another ebook for our 25th anniversary that we're celebrating today, called Creating Global Change. This time she's looking for authors based all over the world who are bringing global themes into their classrooms, or those who'd like to and want to write about it. You can see the details on the screen now, I hope. Please get in touch with us if you'd like to contribute to that project. Okay, I'm going to have a quick look now, see what questions we have. Do we have any questions? Okay. We've got a question from Jan Bryan. How can we make our students feel that they're in a real classroom rather than a virtual one? How can we make online teaching more human? Who would like to start with that one?
I mean, I would say to that, I think, I suppose, don't be afraid to acknowledge that, you know, it is digital, but allow people the space to go away from the screen for a few minutes and do whatever they're doing and come back. You know, for example, that offline thing that can happen, and then they can come back and report on what they've been doing, or to go and practice their language with someone in their house or whatever it might be. So I think recognizing, you know, just things like how they're sitting, where they're doing the lesson, and those sorts of things. So making it you know, acknowledging the physical and the reality of it, I think, is important, and not just pretending it is only online.
Thanks, Chris. Margit, any tips?
I'm here. Yeah. Well, I would say, I mean, each platform has its own potential, its own possibilities, but I think it's always an issue. How do you make people feel that it's a human encounter and not just a pedagogic encounter? I treat your students as human beings and respond to what they're saying, give them a chance to interact. The platform we are using now, Zoom, I think is really good for this. This is by no means a promo for Zoom at all, but this is the one we're using, but many other platforms allow this as well. But I would just say, yeah, so don't just want to get through the business, but relate to your students as human beings. You can have warmers, you can have lead-in things, you can have discussion as well. So all the things that you do in the classroom in an altered way, but I think you can do online as well, I would say.
We've got another question from Rasha. She asks, how can we keep teachers motivated when they themselves are put under a lot of pressure? I know many people who really want to make a difference, but when they start giving up, then they start giving up under the pressure they're put under. Alan, any thoughts on that one?
Well, yeah, I understand that people are under a lot of pressure to conform. I think, why do we have GISIG? You know, you get together, you are stronger together than you are on your own. I think that's the important message. Find other people who think like you do, and try and act together. It helps a lot to share your burden.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it's related to Claire asked a similar question just before there about having had discussions with colleagues who say we should only be teaching English, not indoctrinating our students. And I think it can feel quite lonely sometimes if you're globally minded and want to push that, you know, in your classroom, but others don't. But I would say to that, you know, it's, you know, you're not indoctrinating your students. You're indoctrinating them also by not talking about global issues, but just in a different way. It's where that base of the ELT industry is at, or what the norms of the ELT industry is at. And I think, as Alan's saying, collectively, we need to advocate for this and to show that, you know, global issues doesn't have to be something additional within there. It can be integrated into what we're doing. You know, language, teaching language and learning about the world can go hand in hand. And so I think it's emphasizing that, and the more high quality materials that we can create which teach English as well as global issues, you know, that's going to strengthen the hand of what we're trying to do, to show that it doesn't have to be something separate, but is integrated into good quality English language teaching.
We've got another question here from Thomas, which is more about teacher training. In a teacher training context, how can teachers be convinced that global issues are as relevant as teaching to the exam? Margit, you were telling me earlier that you've been doing some teacher training. How do you deal with that?
Well, yes, I've been doing teacher training for the past 30 odd years. Yes, so, well, yeah, teaching through to the exam. Of course, these constraints are real, of course, that we have to teach through the exam. But I think, where is change going to come from? As I was saying, our sphere of, you know, the possibility to change is always a little bit bigger than we think. So just kind of keep pushing at the boundaries. I also think that you don't necessarily have to bring global issues into the classroom yourself. Just create that opening, that space. Your students will bring it in. My students do, for sure. You know, they're young, and like some people were writing in the chat box now in particular, this is a very special moment in time. And young people, you know, they care. They're interested in what's happening in the world. So if you get them to bring in their own topics, or give a topic like change and get them to bring in, you know, articles or songs or poems, then they will bring in the global issues. So I think just create the space for it, and they'll come in. I also wanted to say that the options, as Chris said, going back to that point about indoctrination, of course, definitely not. I mean, global issues are definitely not about indoctrination. It's just that creating a safe space in the classroom to talk about things that matter, but really not, there is that criticism that the teacher as an educator is like an indoctrinator, but nothing could be further from the truth. But just really, I mean, that is the place, education is the place where young people can talk about important issues. Where else will they learn how to talk, you know, in a civilized way about politics and all the things that become taboo, sometimes in public discourse as well. So I would just say, you know, create some space and see what the students are interested in, and bring that in. It doesn't have to be your burden, but just allow whatever the students care about to come into your class, balancing it, of course, with all the other constraints.
That's really sound advice. Thank you. Okay, I think we're almost ready to dive into our breakout rooms. First, though, I'd like to share some very exciting news. GISIG now has its very own podcast. It's called the Global Issues Podcast, and on each episode, I interview a special guest about the topics that are so often sidelined from our English language coursebooks and classrooms. Now, the full extended version of the podcast is available for members only, but non-members can still get a taste. The whole of the first episode is free, and the first segment of future episodes will also be free as well. So if you're interested, please do subscribe. It's now live and available via Spotify and Pocket Casts, and hopefully soon also Apple Podcasts. We're working on it. Or you can just head straight over to Podomatic. I think the link's there for you on the slide you can see. Okay, so now it's time to hand over to you. We're going to give you the opportunity now to share ideas and collaborate with other critical educators from all around the world. In a moment, you're going to find yourself added to a breakout room with several other attendees. Once you're there, you're free to turn on your cameras and unmute yourselves, say hello. Please just spend 5 minutes introducing yourselves and your teaching contexts very briefly, and perhaps the global issues that are particularly relevant to you and your students. And then we'd like you to spend the remaining time discussing the 2 questions that you can see now on the slide there. What specific action would you like to take to address global issues in your teaching context? And secondly, what activities, tools, or publications would you like to see GISIG offer to support you in doing this? Once you're in your breakout rooms, You won't be able to see this slide, but you should soon find the same questions in the chat. So take a look there, as well as a link to the Padlet board that we've created, especially for you to add your group's ideas. That will remain there on Padlet for the foreseeable future for your own reference. So I will see you all in a few minutes' time. Enjoy your discussions. So I don't know about you, but I've really, really enjoyed this past hour that we've spent together. And for me, at least, it's been a reminder of why we do what we do as a SIG, getting critically minded global educators all together, share lots of ideas, learn from each other and reflect and hopefully take some action to try and change the world and make it a little bit of a better place in some small way. I'd like to end by thanking my fantastic support team for today's event, Linda and Gergo for putting together the party bag of resources that you're all going to receive after we finish, Latsi for his incredible tech support, both before and during the event itself. It's been seamless, thank you so much. We couldn't have done it without you. And finally, to our 3 very engaging guests who've given up their Saturdays to be with us today, Alan, Margit and Chris, thank you for all you've done for the SIG in the past, and thank you so much for being with us today to celebrate here our anniversary. That's all from me. Happy birthday GISIG. Please get involved in our next 25 years. Bye-bye.
Bye.